right, well, I want to start by just speaking about how, as a parent, one of the things that is always constant and certain in life is the fact that your kids are going to come to you with requests for things. And it's never ending, the questions and the requests that they come to us with. And as parents, usually, well, for me at least, there's 4 possible answers that I will give my kids. The first is a yes, obviously. If it's something that, is fairly simple and straightforward and I don't have any dramas with it, I'm quite happy to just say yes. There's always the possibility that the answer is going to be no. And that's not always well received, obviously, when our kids desperately want something. But sometimes that actually is the best answer in some circumstances. And then there's that other answer that is the maybe or the we'll see. With my kids, when they hear a maybe from me, they take that as a no. They basically say, "Mum, you might as well just say no. We know that it's going to be no. You're just not quite ready to say no to us yet." And so the maybe or the wait, we'll see sort of answer falls in the middle there. And I remember when the answer's no, our children can become quite clever in the way that they will try and change that no into a yes. There might be tantrums, there might be manipulation, there might be negotiation. I have one particular child who is very good at negotiation. And I remember one of the requests that my kids came to me with at varying stages of their teenage years was, "Mum, can I have a phone?" And I set a precedent with Jamie. I didn't actually give him a yes until he was in year 9. And I'm glad I did that because, as you know, as parents, when we set precedents with our first child with some of these decisions, the other kids, know that that's what they can expect. And so I remember when Jamie came to me, I can't remember quite how old he was, maybe in year 8, maybe the beginning of year 9, and was trying to convince me that it was time he needed a phone. And I said no. And so Jamie, who was a 4-unit English student in year 12, decided to write me a persuasive essay with all of the reasons that I should say yes to giving him a phone. This is a true story. He wrote this beautifully crafted essay and gave it to me to read, and it was very convincing. He had explained to me that for safety issues it would be really great if he had a phone that, he's often with the girls without me when they catch the bus or whatever, and he can call me if there's ever a drama. He told me about how all of the other kids his age now had a phone, and it was making him feel a little bit left out and different. And I can't remember the rest. I wish I'd kept it, but it was very persuasive. And eventually I did, obviously, say yes. But the times when as parents we say no to our children, does that mean that we're bad parents? Definitely not. Doesn't mean that we don't care about our children and what their best interests are. Absolutely not. In fact, sometimes when we have to say no to our kids, it's because we know what's best for them, and it comes down to the fact that we care about them and love them so deeply that the answer has to be no in some situations. And what I want to speak to you about today is that exact idea that sometimes when we are pouring our hearts out to God about something that we believe we need or want in our lives, that sometimes God's answer is also no. And that can be a very difficult thing to hear. And sometimes we try to negotiate with God or convince him otherwise. But sometimes the no from God is actually absolute best answer that we could receive at that time. We just don't see it yet. And it doesn't mean that God is not a faithful God, that God is not a good God, that God doesn't care about you. So to start with, I just want to look with you at a couple of passages where Paul, we'll start with Paul, in the Bible actually received a no from God. So we're going to start by going to 2 Corinthians, if you can turn there with me in your Bibles. 2 Corinthians chapter 12. And we're going to read from verse 7 through to verse 10. So it says, "To keep me from becoming conceited because of these surpassingly great revelations, there was given me a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it from me, but he said to me, 'My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness.' Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong." So here we see Paul actually pleading. My NIV version uses the word pleaded. He pleaded with God to take away whatever this ailment was that he had. And God's answer to him was no. And God's response to him was that because of that weakness, I'm actually going to be glorified through you. You're going to have a greater depth and understanding of my grace and my power in that weakness. I want you now to come over to Acts chapter 16. And this is Paul again, but a completely different situation where God again, in a roundabout way, says no. Paul is on one of his missionary journeys and obviously spreading the gospel, doing God's will, working for God. And this is quite an interesting story here, because it says in verse 6, Paul and his companions travelled throughout the region of Phrygia and Galatia, having been kept by the Holy Spirit from preaching the word in the province of Asia. So already God has said no once to going to a particular area. When they come to the border of Mysia, they tried to enter Bithynia, but the Spirit of Jesus would not allow them to. So they passed by Mysia and went to Troas. It's another example where you would assume that what they're doing is actually God's will, something God would want them to be doing, going into all the nations to preach the gospel and share God's good news. And for some reason, God has closed that door and said, no, you're not to go there. I have a different plan and a different purpose for you. Even Jesus received a no from God. In the Garden of Gethsemane, he pleaded with God to allow that cup to be taken from him. And God's answer was no, even to him. So when God says no to us, we're actually in good company. And it's not always a bad thing. With Paul, God's message to him was basically that he was to pass by Mysia and go to a different place. And I just want to, I guess, put this thought in your mind that sometimes we need to pass by our plans in order to get to God's purpose. We might make plans and have ideas and things that we think we need, or places we want to go, or things we want to do. And a lot of the time it's with good intent that we're doing it for God. But sometimes God actually has a greater purpose and a greater vision that we can't see yet. And sometimes he will close a door and say no, because our plans are actually not his purpose. So I just want to share with you for a little bit about my personal journey with, I guess, experiencing God saying no to me in a particular situation, and the lessons that I learnt from that. And I guess deeply entrenched in this message is the journey that God has taken me on in my prayer life particularly. So when Caitlin was about 2 years old, my husband and I we saw a job advertised at an Adventist school in Esperance in Western Australia, and prayed about it. There was a job going for both of us in a small Adventist school, 3-teacher school, and we felt God leading us to go there and work in this school. And so we did that. We spent 3 years there, but it was, for those who are teachers, if you've ever taught in a small school, you'll know that it's a huge job and requires an awful lot of time and energy above and beyond, working in a larger school. But we were incredibly driven and motivated to serve God, to just do everything we could to make this school a success, and believed that God had called us there and were just pouring everything into it, to the point where we were working 70-hour weeks. Most weeks the kids would fall asleep on beanbags in my classroom, watching a movie most nights while we were working, and we'd be in there all day on Sundays. I look back on it now and just think how ridiculous it was. But we were young and we had energy and we believed we were doing what God had called us to do, and we were just pouring everything into it. But it wasn't sustainable for me. And by the 3rd year we were there, I started to have major anxiety and would get panic attacks every time I had to go into school. I would get tingling down my arms, and start to just feel my heart racing. I remember one day actually going into the hospital to have a ECG done. It was that severe, and it was basically just, I got to the point of burnout from the stress of the workload and everything that we were doing. At the end of 3 years there, we moved to Taree and took on another small school, even smaller this time, at Manning Adventist School. And again, working fairly crazy hours, and again felt called there by God. We were doing God's work, but still I guess I had got myself to a point where I was working for God but not connected to God as my source of strength. And life had become so busy that I just didn't have time for God in my life. And that period of time, even at Manning, I continued to just keep working and pushing myself. But by the 2nd year there, my anxiety became even worse, and I reached a point of complete burnout where I actually one day got so dizzy while I was teaching that I had to lie down on the floor in my classroom and get one of the kids to go and get someone to come and help me. I ended up with what's called labyrinthitis, which is often the result of a middle ear infection, which I didn't have, and discovered that another cause of that is stress. So it's basically severe vertigo. I couldn't even sit up in bed without vomiting. Everything was spinning, and I ended up being admitted to hospital and spent a week in hospital with a drip, trying to get it under control. But it was basically just stress-induced from the hours I'd been working and the reaching a point of burnout. So I ended up taking some leave at that point to get over that, to rest. And then at the end of that year, we moved down here. And at that same time, I was going through a divorce. And that, I guess, on top of everything else, was really starting to take a toll. I moved down here without work and was casual teaching at Avondale. They were getting plenty of work. By about partway through that year, I picked up a maternity leave position. And so I was relying on the income, but at the same time recognizing that any school environment now, I had this link in my head that my stress and anxiety was related to school and work, and any school environment was a trigger for me. And so I was kind of caught in this trap of having to teach to earn money and have an income, but just pleading with God that I couldn't go and teach anymore. I just was totally burnt out and needed rest, and I believed at the time that I actually needed a completely different job. I convinced myself that if God would provide me with a different job that was not in a school environment, that I would be able to heal and get over my anxiety and be okay. And so I began this process of every night on Seek looking for jobs, praying to God, just pleading with God to take away my anxiety, to help me get better, and to provide me with some other job. And God's answer to the job issue was always no. It just always no. Nothing ever came along that was right. Nothing ever worked out. And I continued to turn up at school and teach until the point where my burnout just reached the place of, and my anxiety of being so bad that I actually was hit with severe depression. And reached a point where I just couldn't keep working, basically. Thankfully, at that point, I was employed at a school with an amazing principal who stepped in and just took care of me, organised long service leave for me. I wasn't quite due, but under circumstances like this, it was approved, and just organised for me to have a term off. And I remember just praying to God and thinking, God, if you just give me some other job, I'll be fine. I just can't keep teaching. I tied it all to teaching and being in a school environment. And God kept saying no. So while I was on my long service leave, I suddenly had all this time on my hands. I'd realised that I'd been working all this time, pouring my heart into teaching kids about God, working for God in Adventist schools, and I had actually lost sight of God for myself in my own life. And that time that I had off over my long service leave was actually the greatest gift that I could have ever received, because it provided me with time that I hadn't had free time for years. And my kids would go to school each day, and I had time just to be with God. And I developed a habit throughout that time of walking. And I would walk for about an hour each day. Walking's really good for depression, any form of exercise. they reckon is just as effective as an antidepressant. And so walking just became a habit for me. And as I developed this habit of walking, at about the same time, I was reading a book called Steps to Personal Revival, which I would highly recommend, that talks about prayer and having the Holy Spirit in your life, but it's the thing that I took from it is the idea of praying in a way that we are claiming God's promises in our life. And so what I started to do was to memorize. I was just so desperately in need of God's peace. With the anxiety and depression, my greatest longing was just for peace. And so I started to memorize promises in God's word that promise us peace. And, I haven't shared with you too, at this time we have, I'll show you. Let me finish this. As I was memorizing these promises about peace, I started to make my walk each day my prayer time. And so the whole time I was walking, I would be praying and pouring out my heart to God, but also saying these promises out loud and just claiming these promises in my life. And so I ended up on this journey where I had this daily prayer walk. And I had someone that held me accountable to that as well, my prayer partner. We have a border collie, Max, who is very energetic and had been a little neglected up until this point. And so I started to take him on my walk each day. And even to this day, every morning, our bedroom window opens out onto our back porch, and he knows when I get up, we're going for a walk, and he's up there on the windowsill, looking through the window, waiting for me to come out for our walk. And so he became actually part of my healing, because he was always there waiting for me every morning, let's go for our walk, and it actually kept me accountable to that. But that prayer time each day basically became my lifeline. To the point where I actually believe that it's what turned things around for me. Prayer is an act of surrender. And the promise that I just continually claimed during this time was this one. This just became an anchor for me during that time. It says, don't worry about anything, instead pray about everything. Tell God your needs and don't forget to thank Him for what He has done for you. If you do this, you will experience God's peace. That was what I just clung to. And it's amazing how prayer actually is the vehicle to that peace, because it's an act of surrendering everything that we're worrying about, everything that we're holding on to and stressing about to God. And when we surrender it to God, it actually just lifts that burden from us and gives us that peace. So over time, this promise actually started to become a reality in my life. The more I connected back with God and began to trust Him and rely on Him, the more I started to heal and just experience this peace that God promises. Still to this day, this is like 6 years later now, I walk and pray every day. It's just a habit that I have formed. And until I went through this experience, prayer had never been a consistent part of my life. I'd always wanted it to be, but I had always been very inconsistent. I'd have periods of time in my life where I would spend time in prayer, other times in my life where I just wouldn't be praying at all. And this experience brought me to the point where prayer is now just such a consistent part of my life, because I've tied it to a habit of walking. But I want to share with you some of the things that I've learnt about prayer. Prayer is hard. And the reason I say that is that we can't see God. We can't hear him speaking back to us. When we speak to each other, we get responses back. We get, something in return. We can, I guess with people, what I'm saying is with people, they're standing right there in front of us, demanding our attention. And so we're less likely to neglect that. Whereas because God is invisible to us, there's not a visible person standing in front of us saying, spend time with me, talk to me. And so it's actually easy to neglect that time with God and not remember that he's there. The thing I find hard about it is just not hearing. God speaks to me without a doubt. I feel promptings from God when I pray. But the thing that I just long for most about heaven is being able to actually hear God's response back to me, hearing God's voice speak back to me, and replying to me. I've also learnt that prayer is a habit that we have to cultivate. If we're complacent about it and just think it's going to happen, it probably won't be a consistent part of your life. It's actually something that we need to create. It doesn't mean that what you're praying becomes habitual, but find a way to connect it into your life in a way that it's just a habit. For me now, I walk and pray every day. And it's just that part of my routine. This has been revolutionary for me. Because I was walking when I prayed, I began praying out loud. And I cannot recommend this highly enough. I know it felt weird at first. People who walk past me, I walk at sort of normally between 6 and 7, so there's not a lot of people, but people who walk past me probably just assume I'm talking to Max or that I'm crazy, but that's okay. But I pray out loud the whole time for 30 minutes to an hour, depending how long I'm walking, always out loud. And that absolutely changed my prayer life, because until then, I had always prayed in my mind when I spent my time with God. And for some reason, my thoughts would always drift away and I'd get distracted. And partway through my prayer, I'd be thinking about something else and dragging myself back to praying again, and this constant battle. There is something about praying out loud that just keeps you focused on your conversation with God. It's almost as though I can imagine God standing right there next to me, walking beside me, and we're chatting. That's actually how it feels. I'm just chatting to God out loud the whole time. And that speaking out loud just really, makes it a much more focused prayer time for me. I would highly recommend that if you haven't tried it. And also claiming God's promises. For me, I had memorized promises about God's peace, and I would thank God for those and claim those in my prayer time. Thank you, God, for the peace that you give me when I trust in you. Thank you, God, that you promise to carry my burdens, and just claim those promises of God as a reality in your life. Prayer partner to hold you accountable. For me, it's Max. For you guys, I know there's some people in our church who have a prayer partner over the phone that they ring and have prayer with once or twice a week. But praying with someone else is really good at cultivating that prayer in your life as well. I have a prayer partner at school, our school principal actually. I meet with her one morning every week and pray with her and for her. And there's something really powerful about praying for other people and praying into other people's lives and just supporting people through prayer. It's an incredible blessing when we can do that. And prayer is an act of surrender. When we pray, we're basically saying, God, I can't carry this anymore. I'm just going to give it all to you and trust you with it. And that is what's going to ultimately give you peace when you can do that, when you can hand it to God. And this is the other thing, I guess, which is getting back to what I started with, that I've come to believe that there's actually no such thing as unanswered prayer. I believe God answers every prayer. It's just that sometimes the answer is no. And we think that that's an unanswered prayer. It's not. God hears and answers every single one of our prayers. And when he says no, it doesn't mean that he's not a faithful God. It doesn't mean that he doesn't care about your situation. It doesn't mean he hasn't heard your prayer. It just means that he's actually got something bigger and better in mind for you. That as your Father, he loves you enough to say no, because he knows that he has a greater purpose and a greater plan for you. You just can't see it yet. And for me, I actually believed that I needed to get out of school environments to be able to heal and get better. And God said no to that. Still today I'm teaching and I'm in schools and I love it. I've got back to the place where I turn up to school every day and I don't have that anxiety and those panic attacks, and I love it. And I'm glad God said no, because in that no, he took me on a journey of learning to trust him, learning to surrender everything to him, and basically to this point that he needed me to be able to pass by my plans in order to get to his purpose for me, which was, I guess, I needed to experience the pain and all of that because it forced me to seek him. And he is the ultimate healer, right? And once I was able to reconnect with God, that's when the healing came. So the final, I guess the big thing that I want to leave with you today is this idea. This is my big idea that I just want you to take away and ponder. That sometimes God's answer is no, because rather than change your circumstances, he wants to change you. And sometimes we're waiting on God to step in and intervene and think, if you will just answer this prayer and change this or that, then everything will be okay. But what I've learned is that maybe God just actually wants you to sit in that pain or in that circumstance for a while, because in that struggle, he's actually going to work in you and change you and bring about good in your life. I'm just going to invite the band up. We're going to sing one more song to finish, but I just want to challenge you, I guess, that I don't know where you're at in your journey. I'm assuming a lot of you are probably facing a period in your life where God is telling you no, or you're waiting on God to act or to do something on your behalf, and you're just crying out to God, pleading with him to answer your prayer, to change a situation for you. But I just want to invite you to trust in God's goodness, that as your Father, he knows what's best for you. He can see a bigger picture than what you can. And I can promise you that in time, you will be able to look back and be able to see that God actually knew best, that he was working for good in your life and in your situation. And by surrendering control to him, you'll be able to just trust and experience peace. Trust in God's faithfulness. God is just so incredibly good. and faithful, and he will continue to be so. And so whatever, I guess I just want to encourage you to cultivate prayer in your life, that act of surrendering everything to God is what's going to bring you peace. And to trust in God's goodness and faithfulness, that as your Father, even if he's saying no, that he knows what's best, and that he is going to work all things together for good in you and for his glory.